So we've got a YOD formation coming up, and I wanted to explore it because, this particular YOD coming up this month in August 2024 isn't a particularly rare YOD. However, it gives me the opportunity, and I've got the time, to record a little bit about a YOD and to explore what it means. It's also known as the finger of fate or finger of God. It's known as quite a cosmic life path alignment. And if you've got this in your chart, no doubt you'll be more than aware of it because of the kinds of energies it brings up. So this seems like a perfect opportunity. In this video, I'm going to be looking at YODs as they present in a few different example charts. I'm going to have a look at the YOD coming up this month and also how it reconstitutes itself as a slightly different YOD, but with a similar theme. I will talk about how YODs are formed. And then I'll also talk a little bit about quincunxes or inconjuncts, which is the angle, the 150-degree angle in astrology that facilitates a YOD. You need two of them in the same place to create a YOD. So, or in a pointing in the same place to create a YOD. So hopefully this will be a helpful little short-ish video of about 30 minutes to deep dive into these kinds of aspects and energies. Before I get going, I just want to say thank you for joining me. If you're new to this channel, hello and welcome. And if you've come back, I love that. Thank you so much. My whole channel, Feel Good Astrology, is all about finding freedom through analyzing the patterns in our charts and from understanding them and being able to take that freedom and that sense of possibility, because I do think once we are aware of things, we can create possibilities for ourselves. We can start applying that to what we see coming up. So I really see that Feel Good Astrology, my channel, but astrology in general, is here to help us. It's a very powerful tool. And I want to share as much as I can about how I use it, so that you can have some fun and freedom and possibility. My name's Louisa, by the way. Let's get cracking then. So let's bring on the first of the slides. So this is just a quick look. This is a glancing look at the YOD we've got coming up in August. It's with Neptune and Pluto. Neptune and Pluto YODs are the most common type of YODs because Neptune and Pluto in our lifetime will always be seen in a sextile, and a YOD is based on a sextile. It's got a sextile at its base. You need a pretty exact sextile. Some astrologers say you can have quite a wide orb, but I like to use an orb of 2 degrees. So, these guys, Pluto and Neptune, are in a sextile. There is less than 2 degrees between them. And then you need a third planet. And that third planet is Mercury, which is retrograde. We've also got Neptune retrograde and Pluto retrograde. So not only is this a YOD, all 3 planets are retrograde. Now, again, Pluto and Neptune spend almost half of their year retrograde. So that's not necessarily unusual either. But Mercury is only retrograde 3 times a year, for a maximum of 9 weeks in total out of a whole year. So yeah, that's kind of interesting. What you'll see is Mercury is at 2 degrees. 2 degrees here in the sign of Virgo, going retrograde. By the end of this YOD, he will actually have gone into the sign of Leo, which will be interesting. But the YOD is created by these 2 quincunxes, or they're also known as inconjuncts. Some astrologers use the title inconjunct, some use quincunx. I prefer quincunx, but they're the same things. They're essentially 150-degree angles. And they have a very tight orb. So astrologers might use an orb as wide as 4. So you'd add 4 onto 150 to make it up to 154. You would also minus 4 to make it 146. So you might have, if you're using those parameters, if Mercury was over here, you might still have a YOD between, Neptune and Pluto. But I prefer to use a 2 degree orb. The more exact, I think the more special. Essentially, the third planet is the thing that is making it magical. And of course, because Pluto and Neptune happen to be sextile all the time, every time a planet goes over this point, it brings up a yod. So the moon is doing that. Like I say, the moon makes a yod every month with these two planets. And that can be up to 8 hours because of the speed that the moon works at and according to the orb you're using. Also, like if there's if there are two other planets that are in a sextile to each other, especially if they're in a really exact sextile, the moon will be making yods every month to those whilst they're in the sextile. Of course, with Neptune and Pluto, they move so slowly, that they are in the same sign for years and years and years and years. And interestingly, Pluto's about to has changed signs, and Neptune is changing signs next year. So all the new yods will be shifted over. But they've been creating, like these yods like for forever and a day. So the sun will go over this point once a year. Mercury goes over this point. Venus goes over this point. Can you imagine what it's like when Mars goes over this point? I mean, that creates a very strong energy as well. So that's essentially what a yod is. Now, what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about yods in real life situations. In fact, before I do that, I just want to put a shout out to all the people that support this channel. Obviously, I mean, these are people who've actually given me a donation and donated to the channel, bought me a coffee or whatever. That is absolutely really, really appreciated because all the support helps. But, I also thank you if you share, if you like, if you subscribe, or if you write a nice comment. It all makes my day. It cheers me up. It makes me a lot more wow, I just feel like I really want to share, so thank you so much. So yeah, let's look at some other yods before we go into this one in August. So because there's some other features of a yod that I really want to sort of demonstrate. So this one is a fantastic yod to look at because you'll see Chiron here is at 18 degrees in the sign of Taurus. Pluto is at 19 degrees in the sign of Libra. And Neptune is at 19 degrees in the sign of Sagittarius. Again, this is a Pluto-Neptune yod, which is a lot more common than all the other types of yods. So, you would expect that. But Chiron is a really, really slow-moving planet. So a lot of people would have been born with this yod, given how slow that Chiron moves. Again, this isn't rare necessarily, but its alignment is really, really beautiful. These two are at 19 degrees and Chiron is at 18 degrees. That's pretty tight, really tight. And, they're not exactly easy planets to facilitate. Now, you might already be aware of the energy of a sextile. The sextiles are easy. They're kind of friendly. They're helpful. They want to get involved. It's about ease, I would say. And like short bits of movement, but nothing too hard. Things usually come in and out very easily. It's not about stress or force or pushing yourself. So, I always think that, and trines are, show a bit of talent, but I think sextiles are quite busy. I think the 60-degree energy here has an element of busyness, where we're actively doing something, but it's still quite easy. It's not onerous. It's almost like what we do because it's so easy. It's our go-to methods. It's our go-to strategies. It's what we know to be easy, what we know to get results with. And so we do it. So, this energy is always very, very easy. Now, there's something about yods. They're always formed with midpoints. Now, I don't know if you've looked at the midpoints in your chart or not, but a midpoint has a sensitivity. So, for instance, in people's charts. Now, this is a difficult one because this person is born literally coming into the time of the full moon. And so their midpoint of the sun and the moon would be on this side, most likely around their Uranus because they've got a T-square. So that's interesting. But like a midpoint is, let me show you like the midpoint here between the Sun and Venus would be somewhere around here in Leo. The midpoint is always the closest point right in the middle in between two planets. And it's almost like a little nexus point. It sort of carries, it's almost like where these two planets kiss and maybe where they interact. There's a kind of sensitivity about it. It's a little bit like if you've looked at synastry, which is the art of comparing your chart with the chart of somebody else, you'll see where all your planets align together. But there's another kind of relationship chart called a composite chart. And that is where you put the midpoint between your sun and the midpoint between your partner's sun, or the person that you're comparing your chart to, and you work out what that midpoint is. It's like working out the average. And we always go with the average closest to the two planets rather than the average midpoint away from those planets. This is where that energy is best expressed. So, we've got this midpoint here, which is very sensitive. Now, most people, a lot of astrologers will look at the midpoint between the sun and the moon, because the sun and the moon are obviously two really important facets of our chart. And so knowing where that sensitivity is, a bit like where the moon and the sun may be in their energy, it's almost like a kiss. It's like that third thing that exists between them. In fact, that's what I meant to say. The composite chart, which looks at the midpoint between your chart and the midpoint between somebody else's chart. It's an entity in its own right. It doesn't represent you, it doesn't represent your partner, but it represents the relationship that exists between you, like the space between you. It's the relationship. And so the midpoints, I think, are like the relationship between those two planets within your chart. And it's like a little kind of cosmic kiss, I think. That's just my explanation for it today. It might change tomorrow, but that's how I can best explain it right now. It's like the fusion, or how those two planets are expressing themselves almost as a third energetic. So the midpoint of the sun and the moon is important in its own right. The midpoint between these two would be here, but the opposite midpoint between these two would be exactly opposite. So if you've got the midpoint of two planets at 1 degree in the sign of Leo, like this midheaven is, the exact opposite midpoint would be at 1 degree in the sign of Aquarius. And that's kind of what we've got here. So if you have a look at the midpoint between Pluto and Neptune, it would be 19 degrees in the sign of Scorpio. Well, this Chiron energy is exactly opposite the midpoint of these two. And so it's on the sort of opposing midpoint, if that makes sense, which, we really concentrate on these two midpoint, like this midpoint here. So the midpoint energy of Pluto and Neptune and how these two work together is triggered in an opposition to Chiron. So it is really, really quite dynamic, because I think all oppositions have a sense of projection, because you've got something in one place and you've got something in the exact opposite place. And all you can do is look at the other, a bit like the sun and the moon. One is emitting, the other is kind of like a big projector screen. The moon is always reflecting things. In a relationship, wherever you are, your partner is reflecting back to you how you appear to be, and vice versa. And so Chiron here, which is known as the wounded healer, and I also think he is a planet that helps you master things, because I think it shows you where you might feel very, very vulnerable. And, if you can master that vulnerability, then you have really achieved something, attained something really special in life. So, the mastery of vulnerability here, and to be able to move beyond your vulnerability here, is offset, or is reflected upon, or, there is this kind of an interesting juxtaposition between healing yourself and mastering your vulnerabilities, whilst also being reminded of the Pluto Neptune midpoint. Now, if you think Pluto is about transformation and also deepest surrender, and Neptune, I think, is highly creative, highly spiritual, but also very much about losing your identity in some way. Like if you merge with the collective, you kind of forget who you are. And some of the more human side of Neptune's, the human expression of Neptune, when it's maybe negatively, when you can't handle the energy, it's escapism. So it's like this, are you surrendering or are you escaping? I do think this is a very sort of important midpoint, and one that we can't really consciously explain. Pluto and Neptune and Uranus, wherever he is, here, right on this midpoint, these three are seen as the unconscious. These are the energies that we can't process directly through our own charts. But when they connect in with the sun or the moon or one of our personal planets, it's like the consciousness of the outer edges of the solar system, or whatever it is that we are learning as a collective group. I mean, it's very collective energy, unconscious energy. It gets translated to us. We are able to find the meaning in it. And so there's something deeply, deeply unconscious about it, especially since you've got Uranus there as well, which is also really creating this sense of change through maybe surrendering to forces bigger than yourself, and also to understand the frailty of having a human identity. I mean, it is, we can get absolutely lost in our egos. And so this is a very, very profound point, and her Chiron is right opposite, exactly opposite. Now, as I go through this, I will talk about the actual energy between quincunxes, like what does a quincunx or inconjunct mean when they're on their own. But the finger of God, or the finger of God, or the finger of fate, has been said that, like, how you manage this energy is not through the sextile, because when you try and manage things on this easy side with your easy strategies, it seems to always come out this end. And given that this end seems to bring up a lot of vulnerability, the more this person is trying to manage the complexities of life, and kind of be busy around it, it almost brings up more of the vulnerability. So it's very interesting. These kinds of quincunxes leading to a YOD, I think, are really difficult to put your finger on, because Chiron is still quite out there. I mean, Chiron, might not even be considered in a YOD by some astrologers, because a lot of people, I mean, Chiron isn't a planet, but, for a lot of maybe modern astrologers who use Chiron a lot, we observe that Chiron patterns, Chironic patterns, really do feel very, very real, hard to ignore. So that's why I've included it. Before I move further, I just want to show you some of the patterns to observe with these. So one of the difficulties about these kinds of layouts is all three planets are usually in a typical one, are in different elements, and they've also got different quadruplicities. That you've got fixed, you've got cardinal, you've got mutable, you've got earth, you've got air, you've got fire. So none of these planets are expressing themselves in the same way as each other. So there's a lack of understanding. There is this difficulty for Pluto as a cardinal air to understand the energies of Neptune, which is mutable fire, and then this fixed earth over here makes it very, very difficult. So each of these I'm going to call them bodies, because also there are some people I got challenged recently about me calling Pluto a planet. So for me, I think, Pluto's energy, I think, he should be reinstated, even if he is the size of the moon or has no moons or all these other things. Pluto feels very real. I'm still putting Pluto and Chiron in, suffice to say. But, the way these bodies are expressing themselves is very, very foreign for the other ones. So yes, they are connected, but they don't really understand each other. Almost like going on a foreign exchange student program where you're all speaking different languages and come from a very different religious background or cultural understanding. You're not going to understand the methods involved. Let's have another look at a different kind of YOD. Now, this is interesting. And again, let's just point out, we've got a fixed fire, a cardinal earth, and a mutable water. Again, none of them have the same quadruplicity. None of them have the same element. We've got Mars in Leo at the top in the 9th house here. Mars is in a fire sign, which I think Mars quite likes. And it's quite proud, it's quite fixed. We've got Venus in Capricorn in a cardinal earth. Venus isn't necessarily that comfortable in the sign of Capricorn. I wouldn't say, she's kind of functional, kind of formal. She expresses herself in a slightly reserved way. And she's a lot more grounded. A lot, she could be stylish, but and classic, but she's not, over the top with emotions. So, we've got this sort of fiery Mars energy. I'm going to do this. I'm proud. I know I've got to do this. And then there's this sort of feminine energy that is a little bit more slower to make a decision, wants to sum things up a bit, warms up a bit slowly, and then you got this Jupiter and Pisces energy, which is watery and mutable, so Jupiter is in his own sign here. Jupiter's very happy in the sign of Pisces, but is very, very I would say quite spiritual and idealistic. Jupiter is expansive and quite unboundaried, really. So we've got a planet here that absolutely can access real deep psychological truths and absolute deep spiritual truths, and there is this deep desire for connection. And then this Venus in Capricorn, that is also slightly reserved, and wants to be functional and get along in a really functional way. And then Mars in Leo wants to be seen and wants to stand out. So these three, as they are expressed, it's interesting. The more this person is wanting to express their kindness and compassion and their beautiful nature, and to expand and connect, and also be slightly reserved in their observations. As they're doing that, they are actually putting themselves in the limelight without even realizing it. And so actually the way to work with these energies, the finger of YOD, it is said to be like a cosmic life path, and I'll talk about the sort of challenges as they arise, when I talk at the end about quincunxes and inconjuncts. But we play to these parts. We are trying to express ourselves. Actually, it's not Jupiter. Why did I write Jupiter? It's not Jupiter, it's Chiron. Oh, it's because there is also I was mistaken here. So this person's actually got Chiron. My apologies if you've been yelling at the screen or about to turn off. If you've kept listening, well done. I don't have time to edit it, so it's gonna have to stay in. So Chiron here, this makes even more sense actually, because I know this person. Chiron, yeah, and Chiron in a conjunction with Jupiter really makes sense, because Chiron is absolutely about healing, and healing in a compassionate spiritual way. This person is really quite devout at times, probably because of the Venus in Capricorn. There is a desire to do things right, a desire to be slightly formal, whilst also being really connected at a deep level. Almost like a table manner, a bedside manner, that you might use with the people that you're working with. And yet whenever they are wanting to spread their knowledge and spread their love of healing and connecting with people, this prouder personality comes out. When this person stands strong for who they are and starts sharing, and actually is unafraid to use their strong voice and their proud voice and their deeply creative voice, their fiery voice, when they use this, they do so much better. And yet when they do this, they also feel quite embarrassed and quite awkward with being seen, because of the Venus in Capricorn, which is slightly reserved and also not wanting to really push. And Chiron in Pisces is also really quite mild. They're not wanting to assert themselves necessarily. So this is really interesting. Like, how does this get resolved? Well, the consensus is you have to use this challenging aspect. This, wherever the YOD is pointing, is showing you where you get your relief. My apologies for getting it wrong. However, we've got Jupiter here, also in a quincunx, to the midheaven. This person's chart is really interesting because we've got two planets here in an exact same spot. Venus and Neptune, which is absolutely deeply loving. And, are we talking about real love? Are we talking about spiritual love? Are we talking about oneness? This person absolutely seeks the kind of love that is almost impossible to experience. Like that sort of dream-like connection. And, because their Venus and Neptune are in the sign of Scorpio, it's so deep, it's so loyal. This person is absolutely looking for the deepest kind of connection, the deepest kind of love, in such a way that it's almost impossible to realize, because we are all human. And their quincunx is to the midheaven. Now, they've also got other quincunxes or inconjuncts. The midheaven's a very sensitive point, isn't it? It's a point of realization. It's a point of standing strong in the world, being seen, being appreciated, our rewards. It's how we appear in public. And there is something deeply at odds here, so the gentle private depth of this deep kind of loving between Venus and Neptune in Scorpio, a fixed water sign, is also connected to the midheaven, which is a mutable air sign. So, these aspects are not comfortable bedfellows. It's interesting because these aspects between planets or points are, at this 150-degree energy is difficult to realize. It's known as being a bit of a neurotic connection between planets, because they speak different languages and you can't satisfy both at the same time. It's like holding two truths that to be true. Like, you've got these two different perspectives. Like, for instance, this person probably wants to feel quite varied and free in their expression in the world. They probably are deeply interested in all the different facets of life, and different forms of intelligence, different forms of sharing and teaching. They are probably quite open and also quite rational. Like, the sign of Gemini is obviously ruled by Mercury. So, they are probably quite a rational learner and learning lots and lots of different things. And of course, the Venus and Neptune, which is deeply loving, in the fixed sign of Scorpio, really wants to focus on something and really wants to get all the attention. But yet this point up here, which is about this kind of delightful view of a really big and complex world and being able to dance between all the ideas, doesn't feel very faithful or loyal. So how does that express itself? We've also got quincunxes here with this person, the moon to the south node, and also Mercury to the north node. This Mercury north node one is interesting because, usually inconjuncts or quincunxes are in a different element and also a different quadruplicity. So Mercury here is a mutable sign, a fire sign, and yet this north node here is in a fixed fire sign. So they're both in fire signs. That's unusual. It's just because of the placement. They are at the end of signs and the beginning of new signs. If it was an exact quincunx, they would, the north node would either be in Cancer or Mercury would be in Capricorn. So, this is just ever so slightly out. This might be a bit easier to understand because, there is the shared energy of fire. Now, this one here, interesting, because we've got the moon in Gemini, which is a fixed air. It's also the moon is also known as being void of course, which is a whole different video to do. But this south node is right at the beginning of Aquarius, which is fixed air. So again, you've got two airs. I actually put that south node is in Capricorn, but it is actually in air. So yeah, we've got these two same element quincunxes. Again, I would say they're slightly easier, but if you think that in this chart, this person's got a south node one and a north node one, and of course the south node and north node are they are in opposition, and obviously the moon and Mercury are in opposition, you've got a very different kind of cross going on here. So I did just do a video about the Grand Cross, where you've got, this is kind of like it's not even a mystic rectangle as such, but it's a different form of it, almost like a parallelogram. It's very, very bizarre. But this would be a very interesting thing to explore at a separate time. These two oppositions that are also creating these quincunxes. I would count this as actually quite an important part of this chart. It's deeply complex. So this has got some real complexity. I really think this is a deeply sensitive point, because of its impossibility. And again, that's the thing with inconjuncts and quincunxes. It feels impossible. It feels, like to hold two opposing truths, or to hold two truths that are completely different in different elements, in different quadruplicities. You have to do a bit of mind bending, and you have to do a lot of acceptance. And so how can you hold two truths that feel so separate to each other? Like, I am committed to being free in my thinking whilst being really, really connected in your loving. As you're holding both of those views, there's going to be these moments in time where you have to compartmentalize your existence, because, oh, that's my career, oh, that's my relationship. So, this person may well have to do that in their life, have a very different way of being in their relationship whilst being deeply free and analytical in their public life and in their career. There's going to be some very deep rifts that come if you're not able to find peace with that. So it's like, how can you make these two what seem like impossible truths to hold at the same time? How can you accept them? How can you make sense of them? So it does take a bit of mind bending, a bit of redirected focus. It's important to adjust your expectations, because, obviously you can't possibly be able to love as deeply as you want to whilst also holding on to this, or, your partner's, it's just quite complicated. Obviously, if we are talking about the whole of this chart, we would be also really focusing here. This is very, very deep as well. So, and I would say this person has. I know this person. I've worked with this person. This person has got a lot to do with faith and forgiveness going on in their chart. So, yeah, very, very big themes. I've got a couple of inconjuncts. And so I can talk about the impossibilities as I experience them. So here, Pluto in the 11th, in fixed air. For me, I got bullied quite a lot as a child, which isn't that unusual. Lots of people do. And so I found that I couldn't really trust people. That's my sort of early experience, or my early listening for social interactions, was that I was always on the outside. My interests, I was always interested in mystical things right from being very, very small, always asking these big questions, which set me aside from the group, set me aside from the people that I grew up around, and also friends and stuff like that. So I would maybe have just one friend that I really focused on, or a couple of friends, but I was never really part of a big group. And the 11th house is a place where we are often in a group and having great friends and stuff. So I have very, very few close relationships, but I'm able to connect in with lots of different people. But, ultimately, that's because I've learned strategies for myself, which is what happens as we grow. But this Pluto here, I feel like an outsider. a lot of the time. And so I always feel like I'm on the outside looking in. And also, Pluto can show power games, and the power of the group, the power of the bully, the power of group think, for instance, is something I really struggle with. And then down here, my moon is in mutable water in the sign of Pisces, arguably one of the most sensitive and least defensive moon signs, I would say. And my Jupiter, also mutable water, also in the sign of Pisces, they're in a tight conjunction. And so just the fusion of these two, the moon and Jupiter, is actually quite a faithful personality, somebody who is really hopeful for people, who really trusts in people, who wants to have high levels of trust, who leaves themselves wide open, especially, in the sign of Pisces. Pisces don't really defend themselves very well. They don't seek to have a defense. They seek to be quite connected. So there's there's one expression of how this shows up in my chart is I love to have these deep connections with people, and I don't feel like I need to protect myself. I feel like I feel like a spiritual being most of the time, and so I don't feel like I have to protect myself. And yet I've come a cropper with these very, very strong energies. Of course, here this is like a lot of people with mutable stuff, and of course I've got a bit more mutable. We tend to flex and bend around more dominant characters, or just go off on our own route. Mutable people tend to be deeply changeable and accommodating, and so here there's a tendency to accommodate for a much more dominant thought, a much more dominant person, a much more dominant environment, and I can't get the balance right. I've never been able to get the balance right. And of course, because of that, I stepped away and therefore enforced being on the outside. So it's something that I've never been able to get a balance with. I'm okay about it now. But obviously, when you're young, you're trying to grow up and make sense of why these patterns keep coming up. I was trying to hold the truth that I can trust people and I love people, and also trying to hold hold the belief that maybe I'm safer on the outside. And actually there are some people who show up who do want to harm and do want to push and do want to suppress and do want to hold you down. Like Pluto is very, very controlling. Interestingly, in my birth family and in my married family, in my actual home family, I have so many people in my sort of family unit that have a planet here right over my Pluto, showing that this is something I've got to learn to manage. I'm pulling people into my life, or it's fated. These aspects really do show something of fate that we need to work on and keep moving on. So that's another sort of expression of the inconjuncts and quincunxes. So just to gone the wrong way. So in terms of a YOD, then you've got two quincunxes, you've got two of these energies playing out. So if I had something here, there would be a YOD pointing to my Pluto, or if I had something up here coming down here, I would have a YOD to my moon and Jupiter. So could you imagine what the pressure is like? That like these are difficult to resolve energies. When you've got two of them, this is pointing to the solution of how you resolve this and that. So if we have a look now what's happening in August, so we've got, again, the least common type of YOD, which is Neptune and Pluto, and they're connected by Mercury. Mercury is retrograde. They're all retrograde. Mercury is essentially in opposition to the midpoint of Pluto and Neptune. Like if Mercury, I don't know if this is actually happening. It probably will do, because Mercury is going to be here. This goes on between the 11th of August and the 17th of August. So if the moon was to line up here, you would actually have another sort of like moment to experience this, because something would absolutely go on this midpoint, really, really like kicking it into touch. So we've got an inconjunct between Mercury and Neptune. So if you think about that, you've got Neptune in the far end of Pisces, which is very, very idealistic, wanting to express human consciousness with absolutely no rules, no boundaries, really trying to be the highest spiritual being we can be, really exploring things in a completely dissolved way. And it feels like society is like so much is dissolving. So many of the standards or expectations or traditions, they're all melting away, like all of our identities. You know, I do think Neptune has a lot to do with our identities. It just seems that everything is dissolving right now. And then Pluto, which can be quite forceful, can be the hand behind the governments and stuff, is really constructing what appears to be a new social norm as it's going into the sign of Aquarius. There's such a big new energy at the moment, and I do think Saturn helped to bring it in, and Jupiter helped to bring it in when they conjuncted here. That's where Saturn and Jupiter had their last grand conjunction at 0 degrees Aquarius on the 21st of December 2020. So there is something very, very big being ushered in. So there is a sort of dissolution of the ego and the individual and the idea of who we are, and this idea of, wouldn't it be great to be connected spiritually? And then there's also this control coming in to say, yes, we need to have a new way of being socially. And then Mercury is retrograde. Mercury often represents the people and also the thought, the mind. How are we working right now? It also represents movement. It also represents buying and selling. The financial markets, moving things around and stuff. So the fact that Mercury's retrograde and trying to work out this energy and also trying to work out this energy. So if you think Mercury in a quincunx with Neptune, you've got this kind of spiritual idealism, this idea that identity is just absolutely dissolving. Any norms about identity and spirituality are, everything just seems to be, for a lot of people, it feels like they're in a dream, which again is, I would say, the last degree of the zodiac, the 29th degree of Pisces, is the complete dissolution of the reality that we know. And so Mercury is in the sign of Virgo, absolutely fully conscious, absolutely working things out for themselves. This is showing the people being very rational actually at the moment, really trying to work things through and going retrograde. So it's like the people are trying to pace back their steps and say, what happened? It feels like we're in a dream right now, or a movie. It feels like things have really shifted, and it's almost snuck up on us. How has this happened? So there is this kind of people movement of trying to get clearer about things, but not being able to get clear about things. It's like, how can you hold the two impossible truths of, we understand things rationally and we understand that there is no story. Like, there is a story, there is no story. Ooh, how do we hold that at the same time? And then Pluto is setting up this whole new social context. And again, we're trying to hold the reality of a whole new social context and getting our minds around that, or how do these incompatible truths work together? How can we make them work together? And so Mercury right now retrograde is trying to work that out. So we've got the mutable Earth. This is another interesting thing, this is actually going to change over the course of these days from start to finish, and it goes from 2 mutables and 1 fixed, and it's going to be changing. So let's see where this ends up. So Mercury goes into Leo by this time. Mercury's here. The chart has shifted because I've done them from when they start and finish. This is set up for a London time zone. So the ascendants, like the wheel has been shifted around, just so you know. So Mercury has gone into the sign of Leo by the time this quincunx, this finger of YOD, this YOD finishes, this finger of fate or God. So Mercury is back here. You'll see now that there could be another YOD that arrives because the moon is coming in on the act as well. So, you know, you could have YODs arriving through different planets. You know, that's how they form and mutate and change. And sometimes they come out of the YOD and then reform. And that's what we're going to experience later on, because, you know, Pluto and Neptune are going to be in this sextile for ages. The moon's going to keep going. Obviously, Mercury's going retrograde. We've got the sun coming in. Now, I have read somewhere that people, you know, some astrologers don't use the sun, but I'm definitely using the sun in this mix. I don't know why, though. I never got to that point. So if you know the answer to that, please let me know. So yeah, so this is how it changes. So if you think about it, Mercury was at the start of this. That's the only thing that's changing, is the position of Mercury. He was going retrograde through Virgo, the rational mind. We're trying to work out, we're trying to go through it step by step. As Mercury hits Leo, I actually think we're connecting into what makes us proud. We're connecting back into our identity. Because if you think about it, Leo is an opposite sign to Aquarius. Aquarius is very non-personal. It's very unpersonalized. It's very universal. Whereas, and this is the interesting thing, isn't it? Because the world we are saying goodbye to, it would appear, is the world that the boomer generation set up. And the boomers mostly have Pluto in the sign of Leo. Now we've got this Pluto in the sign of Aquarius so many years on. And, you know, the sign of Aquarius is really non-personal. So I actually think what's going on right now is we're coming back into this Leo area, and we're thinking, well, we used to have a world where we all counted, we all made a difference in our own unique ways. You know, Leo is about being center of your own story. Leo is about, if you think Leo, the lion, or, you know, the lion as the king of the jungle. Leo is a sign associated with royalty, or the ideas of being, you know, the king or queen, or holding court. You know, if you think of the sun, the ruler of Leo, the sun is the ruler of the solar system. It's the center of the solar system. So the Leo energy is about being center of things. And so Mercury coming backwards is almost saying, the people are saying, well, we should be central in our own story. So it's interesting that, you know, Neptune is kind of dissolving the ego, and Pluto is saying, I mean, like one sentence that I hear said quite a bit, it is like the idea of the WEF, like you'll own nothing and be happy. The idea that we're all at an equal level, we are all an equal participant within this. You know, there's the idea that you know, it's not important to be central to our own story, or that if we're central to our own story, the whole of civilization is going to collapse. So you can see what's going on right now with the people. The people are making their own transition right now. It feels like these two energies are on the outside. There's not much we can do about those. You know, these energies have been set in motion behind the scenes for a really, really long time. These are the unconscious energies that we're all learning from and growing from, and they are playing out. And right now it feels like humanity, are we waking up? Are we noticing that there is a shift and we can't ignore it now? Remember, this is, you know, wherever the YOD is pointing is where we cannot ignore. We need to pay attention. And that is how we resolve it. That's how we get the balance. That's how we're able to hold it. So, you know, Mercury here might be saying, well, we are all important, and at the same time, we are all just a person within a humanity, you know, within a collective. Is it possible to hold both of these as true and find a way to manage that? That is the challenge. I think it's possible. But then again, I've got inconjuncts in my chart, so I've got used to accepting two incompatible truths as a current reality. And that is what humanity is being asked. Can we hold these incompatible truths as both important, both true, what acceptances, what adjustments will need to be made. How can we bend our mind around this? Of course, for a lot of people, this is a brand new thing. They haven't even noticed this before. For the forerunners, or for people who are like way showers, you've been aware of this probably for 10 years, some 20, some 30, but everyone wakes up to these realities as they're changing at a different speed. So yeah, there's a lot going on right now, suffice to say. And then when you add it into the fact that we've also got, right now, we've got a T-square, we've got Jupiter and Mars in a conjunction. There's, and also a grand square coming up when the moon obliges. There's a lot going on. So yeah, that was a few thoughts about the YOD coming up. Whilst it doesn't seem important because it's a common thing, it's not an uncommon thing to have a YOD with Neptune and Pluto. Right now, we're at the time of year where the sun and the moon, Venus has already been over it, but the sun and moon and Mercury are heading over that point. So, obviously the moon's doing it every month, but the sun and Mercury in particular. And if you follow other things like Vesta is also over it as well. So yeah, lots going on. As a little nudge, I mentioned midpoints in this. If you haven't looked at your midpoints, it's worth having a check out where your midpoints are. You can work them out manually, which can be quite fun. Getting your head around maths and stuff. But yeah, find out where your sun and moon midpoint is. Mine, funnily enough, is just a couple of degrees away from where Pluto is right now. So there's a lot going on, lots of internal shifts for me. But anyway, sending you love wherever you are. I didn't realize this was going to be 52 minutes. My apologies. I thought this was going to be a short one. But anyway, lots of love, and speak to you another time. Bye.